I still remember the night my grandpa had the accident, because everything felt slow and loud at the same time. He slipped on the old wooden stairs inside his large house on Willow Street, a quiet place at the edge of the city of Grayford. The house had been standing there for decades, filled with memories, locked doors, and things no one asked about anymore. I was the one who called for help, and I rode with him to the hospital while the rain hit the windows hard. The hospital room was cold and bright, and the sound of machines filled the silence. Grandpa looked smaller lying there, but his eyes were clear. A lawyer named Henry Lawson arrived not long after, carrying a folder thick with papers. My brother Ethan and my sisters Natalie and Rose stood close to the bed, whispering and watching every move. I stayed near the wall, unnoticed, like always. Grandpa asked for a pen with a steady voice. He wanted the will done that night. As he signed, he glanced at me, just for a second, and gave a quiet nod. I didn't understand it then, but that look stayed with me. Outside the window, the city lights of Europe faded into the dark, and I felt that something important had just been set in motion. The reading of the will happened 2 weeks later, and by then the mood had changed completely. The worry in the hospital was gone, replaced by sharp smiles and quiet excitement. We gathered in a tall office building in a clean city in America, the kind of place where everything smelled like glass, leather, and money. The lawyer's office was on a high floor, and from the window you could see streets lined with cars that cost more than most houses. It felt like the right place for greed to feel comfortable. The lawyer, Henry Lawson, sat at the head of the long table. He wore a dark suit and spoke in a calm, flat voice, like this was just another day for him. For us, it was not. My brother Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, already confident. My sister Natalie kept checking her phone, smiling at messages she hadn't even received yet. Rose, the youngest, looked nervous but excited, tapping her fingers on the table. I sat at the far end, quiet, watching everyone instead of the papers. Henry cleared his throat and began. He spoke about Grandpa's life, his work, and how carefully he planned everything. No one listened to that part. They were waiting for numbers. I could feel it in the room, like a held breath that wouldn't let go. When Henry finally reached the money, everything snapped into focus. Ethan was first. He was awarded $110 million. He let out a short laugh, tried to hide it, and failed. Natalie was next. Another $110 million. She covered her mouth, but her eyes shined like she'd already won something she thought was owed to her. Rose followed, also receiving $110 million. She looked shocked, then relieved, then proud, all in the same moment. 3 signatures, 3 smiles, 3 people who believed they had taken everything that mattered. Then the room went quiet. Henry looked at me. He adjusted his glasses and read my name slowly, like it barely belonged in the same sentence. He said Grandpa left me the washing machine stored in the back room of the old house. Nothing else. No money. No shares. Just the machine. For a second, no one spoke. Then Natalie laughed. Not a soft laugh, but a sharp one that cut through the room. Rose joined in, unsure at first, then louder. Ethan shook his head and smiled like he was embarrassed for me. The worthless grandchild gets worthless junk, Natalie said, still laughing. I felt every eye on me. I felt the heat in my face, the weight of their judgment. But I said nothing. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I simply nodded and thanked Henry for his time. The lawyer watched me closely for a moment, like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. The papers were passed around. Each of them signed quickly, barely reading. They were too busy planning houses, trips, and parties across Europe and America. They joked about who would buy first and who would buy bigger. They talked like winners. I signed last. When my pen touched the paper, I felt calm. I knew something they didn't. Grandpa had taught me to listen, not rush, and never underestimate what looks useless. That washing machine wasn't just metal and rust. It was a choice. And by signing those papers, my siblings had chosen without understanding. After the meeting, they barely waited for me. Natalie hugged Rose, already talking about moving to a new city. Ethan clapped me on the shoulder and said I'd figure something out. None of them asked how I felt. None of them wondered why Grandpa would leave me something so strange. I walked out of the building alone. Outside, the city moved fast. Cars passed, people hurried, money flowed everywhere except toward me. Or so it looked. I took a deep breath and smiled to myself. The laughter from the room still echoed in my ears, but it didn't hurt. It reminded me why Grandpa trusted me with silence instead of numbers. They thought the story ended at the table. They had no idea it was just beginning. I returned to Grandpa's house a few days after the will reading. The place stood exactly the same, quiet and patient, as if it had been waiting for me. The house on Willow Street sat in the older part of the city of Grayford, where trees grew tall and neighbors minded their own business. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar smell of dust, wood, and time. This house had always felt honest to me. It never pretended to be something new. The washing machine was in the back room, half hidden behind old furniture and stacked boxes. It looked worse than I remembered. Rust covered the edges, the paint was chipped, and the lid creaked when I touched it. Anyone else would have seen scrap metal. I saw exactly what Grandpa wanted me to see, something ignored. I dragged it into the light, the sound of metal scraping against the floor echoing through the empty house. I took my time cleaning it. I wiped away years of dirt and grease, working slowly, listening to the quiet. Grandpa always said that rushing made people blind. When I removed the back panel, my hands didn't shake. Taped carefully inside was a small metal key, wrapped in cloth to protect it. My heart beat faster, but I stayed calm. This was the moment Grandpa had prepared me for without ever saying it out loud. The key fit a locked door at the bottom of the basement stairs. That door had always been there, heavy and plain, easy to ignore. I unlocked it and stepped inside a small room that smelled like paper and iron. There were shelves, a desk, and boxes filled with documents. Deeds to houses, ownership papers, and contracts stacked neatly, all labeled in Grandpa's careful handwriting. Cities across Europe and America appeared again and again. Everything was organized, hidden in plain sight. On the desk were bank documents showing balances that made my siblings' $110 million look small. The money wasn't flashy. It was spread out, protected, patient. Grandpa had built it quietly over a lifetime. And now it was mine, not because I demanded it, but because I listened. At the bottom of one box, I found a letter addressed to me. Grandpa's handwriting was slow but clear. He wrote that money makes noise and attracts the wrong people. He said the family would fight over numbers but ignore meaning. The washing machine, he explained, was never about value. It was about choice. Whoever accepted it accepted responsibility, silence, and control. I sat there for a long time, holding that letter, feeling the weight of trust settle on my shoulders. I understood then why he made the will the way he did. By signing, my siblings agreed to their shares and gave up claims to everything else. They laughed because they didn't read. They lost because they didn't listen. In the following weeks, I worked quietly. I visited properties without drawing attention. I met with lawyers and advisors who respected privacy. Papers were transferred. Accounts were secured. Everything happened smoothly because it had been planned long before Grandpa's accident. I didn't rush. I didn't celebrate. I learned. Meanwhile, my siblings posted photos, talked loudly, and spent fast. They moved into new houses, traveled, and showed off what they thought was freedom. They never once asked about the house on Willow Street or the washing machine. To them, the story was already finished. One evening, I stood alone in the old house, listening to the hum of the washing machine as it ran for the first time in years. It worked just fine. I smiled at the sound. It reminded me that the strongest doors don't always look like doors at all. Grandpa was right. The quiet path lasts longer. By the time my siblings realized something felt wrong, it was already too late. At first, they were too busy enjoying their money to notice anything else. Ethan bought a large modern house in a busy city and filled it with people he barely knew. Natalie moved between cities in Europe and America, chasing parties and attention. Rose tried to live carefully, but even she believed the money would never run out. They all thought they were safe. I stayed invisible. Months passed, and the old house on Willow Street became my anchor. I kept it exactly the same, fixing only what needed fixing. I spent long nights reading documents, learning how Grandpa had built everything slowly, layer by layer. His wealth wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was meant to last. Every house, every account, every agreement fit together like parts of a machine that only worked if handled with care. The washing machine stayed where it was. I never sold it. I never moved it. It became a reminder of how easily people laugh at what they don't understand. The first crack appeared when Ethan called me late one night. His voice sounded tired, less confident than before. He said investments weren't performing the way he expected. Advisors were suddenly less friendly. Fees were higher. Doors that once opened easily now required permission he didn't have. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't explain. Natalie reached out next, pretending it was just a casual message. She complained about taxes, about rules she didn't read, about contracts she signed too quickly. She asked if Grandpa ever talked to me about money. I replied honestly. I said he talked to me about patience. Rose didn't call. She showed up. She came to the Willow Street house one afternoon, standing awkwardly at the door like she wasn't sure she was welcome. I invited her in. She looked around, surprised that nothing had changed. She asked about the washing machine. I told her it still worked. She didn't laugh this time. I could see it in her eyes then. She understood that something had been missed. I didn't read everything, she admitted quietly. None of us did. I nodded. There was no anger left in me. Just clarity. Over time, the truth revealed itself without me saying a word. Legal letters arrived for my siblings. Rights they thought they had were gone. Properties they assumed were shared were never theirs. The signatures they rushed through had closed doors permanently. Grandpa didn't trick them. He gave them exactly what they asked for. They asked for money. I asked for trust. One evening, I sat alone in the basement room, the documents neatly stored away. I thought about Grandpa, about the nod he gave me in the hospital. He knew how the family worked. He knew who listened and who rushed. This wasn't revenge. It was design. Eventually, Ethan stopped calling. Natalie stopped posting. Rose stayed in touch, not for help, but for understanding. She asked how to live quieter, how to protect what remained. I shared what I could. Grandpa would have wanted that. As for me, I never announced what I owned. I never showed it. I moved carefully between cities in Europe and America, not to escape, but to observe. I bought homes and kept them filled with light, not noise. I worked with people who valued silence and long plans. Sometimes I think about that meeting room, the laughter, the words they used to describe me. It doesn't hurt anymore. It reminds me how close they were to seeing the truth, and how far away they chose to stand. The washing machine still runs. And every time it does, it reminds me that the greatest doors are opened not by force, but by patience, and by knowing when to walk away without a word.